Hello everyone, welcome to the channel if you're new, welcome back if you aren't. I'm EDJ, and we are looking at a new video from a historical YouTuber that we have not covered so far on this channel. This gentleman's name is The Historian's Craft, and the video we're going to be looking at is, when did the Romans think Rome fell? Now that's interesting. Some people act like the fall of Rome is like, when the barbarians invaded and destroyed the western portion. And that's usually the point. When people talk about the fall of Rome, that's what they cover, even though that's just the western portion of Rome. The eastern portion lives on, and then some people would say, at least in my opinion, the eastern portion of Rome fell when the Ottomans took Constantinople. I feel like that's when you could put a definitive end to Rome, at least the eastern portion, though I've heard other people say it fell even before that, like when the Crusaders took Constantinople, etc. So I guess that's the outsider's perspective of the fall of Rome. But it's going to be interesting. When did the Romans think it happened? That's going to be interesting. I'm actually really looking forward to this. This is a new YouTuber. I don't know anything about this guy. I don't know how he presents his videos. But I'm looking forward to seeing what's up. So let's find out when the Romans think Rome fell.
When did the Roman Empire fall? You will get different answers depending on how the historian asking is thinking about the question and what exactly a fall entails. But when did the Romans think the Roman Empire fell? After all, the Western Empire collapsed in the 5th century, but the empire survived in the East until 1453, but the former Western territories were lost. So at some point, they must have thought something about all of this, right? The first 75 years of the 5th century were beyond devastating for the Western Roman Empire. In 400, despite setbacks, things seemed to be fairly alright, but by 475 the Western Empire was reduced to Italy and some other holdings, but we should not think of this as being a rump state, far from it. As the historian Edward Watts points out in his book, The Eternal Decline and Fall of Rome, if the Western Empire of 475 were around today, it would be one of the largest countries in Europe, comprising Italy, most of Sicily, and a fair amount of what used to be Yugoslavia. The next year,
I have 12 emails.
Infamously, Romulus Augustulus was deposed and the imperial regalia was sent to Constantinople, capital of the Eastern Empire. From a political perspective, the Western Empire was gone, but with the exception of a handful of aristocrats, no one appears to have really noticed. Over the next 60 years or so, there was a serious recovery in Italy under the Ostrogothic kingdom, which replaced Odoacer's kingdom, and primary sources speak of filth being washed from Italy under the care of Theodoric, king of the Ostrogoths.
Yeah, I remember when we covered this with Overly Sarcastic Productions, Odoric basically said, hey, didn't they recognize him as, like, the ruler of the West, or something, or the restorer of the West, or something like that? It's been many months since we looked, but it's almost like he was trying to sell himself, I believe, as a part of Rome, or like an extension of Rome. Like, I think if that's it, or I could be completely wrong. But yeah, I should probably rewatch that video. But yeah.
And he was actively compared by Italian senators and elites to Cato, one of the greatest statesmen of the Roman Republic. He was also compared to Trajan and Valentinian, and eventually he was compared to Alexander the Great. And he asked the Eastern Emperor for the imperial regalia to be returned to him. To the Romans living in Ostrogothic Italy, we have very strong evidence that they considered themselves to be living in the Roman Empire still. It was just a portion which was under the control of a client king to the Roman Empire based in Constantinople, and many living in the actual Roman Empire felt the same way. In other words, in about 500, there was very little notion that Rome had fallen.
Oh wow, that's interesting. They don't even. That's interesting. Yeah, obviously we know as we put in the maps. All right, the West fell, and then we white it all out, and then we focus on Constantinople. But yeah, it's not like there was a complete genocide of the Roman citizens. It's not like they all died, or killed. Many were still there, even if like technically they were no longer under the Roman banner, but they're still Roman here in Italy. So yeah, I guess they would be like, I guess we're still here. I mean, under this Theodoric guy, we're still a part of Rome, and yeah, that's interesting. What a unique situation, right? Like, huh.
The same thing applied to the Visigoths in Spain and the Vandals in North Africa. Sure, the political makeup of the Roman Empire might look a bit different, but the majority of the people and political players considered themselves to be living in the res publica, the public thing, the Roman conception of what the state was, and they gave at least lip service to the emperor. Under Theodoric's direction, working in theory under the Roman emperors, his kingdom expanded to the banks of the Danube, southern Gaul, and he created a protectorate in Spain. One could possibly be forgiven for thinking much of anything had really changed. Ennodius of Pavia praised him for restoring the Roman Empire to its former boundary and returning the culture of Rome's ancestors to the land. And yet, a century later, that sentiment was gone, replaced by the idea that something had changed. So, what happened? Well, in 527, the Roman Empire got a new emperor, Justinian, and with him came the crystallization of an idea that had been floating around Constantinople. We often think of Rome falling in 476 because Romulus Augustulus was deposed, but this is actually wrong, and I mean that literally. When the Roman Senate and Odoacer, the general who deposed Romulus, sent the imperial regalia back to the Emperor Zeno in Constantinople, the letter they sent with it stated that this was not a breakaway territory, it's just that two emperors were not needed anymore. The actual text states that there was no need of a divided rule and that one shared emperor was sufficient for both territories.
Oh, wow.
Odoacer would serve as a representative of Constantinople. When Constantinople sent Theodoric back that regalia, the Roman government was telling him that he was an emperor in function if not in name. When we read sources written in Constantinople during this period which discuss Italy, they do not discuss it in terms of a fall. It was instead restored, and Theodoric was leading a Roman revival. In fact,
okay, that's interesting. Yeah, the whole division of Rome is interesting, is that the Romans thought this territory of ours is so big, one man can't rule it all. And then I've never heard of that. Like, obviously we think of Romulus Augustus, the last Western Roman emperor deposed by the barbarians. And even I was like, yeah, that's like the end, right? But it's interesting, I didn't hear that they sent it there under the pretext of, well, there's only one emperor of Rome. This isn't about the territorial taking of and destruction of one side, but rather just a way of looking at, we don't need to, one is sufficient. So that's interesting. I had never heard that before, or that this exchange between the regalia took place. So wow, that's interesting.
This was a major cornerstone of his reign, and it's what makes the Ostrogoths so fascinating. But then, along came Justinian. Justinian's imperial project, to give a shorthand to his entire reign, was based not around reconquest as we sometimes think of it, but around a renovatio imperii Romanorum, the renewal of the empire of the Romans. There was one reference to the idea that Rome had fallen in 476, written before about 500, and it comes from a religious polemic against Pope Leo written by Timothy, Bishop of Alexandria, in 477, but this did not really convince anybody. The historian Zosimus then wrote around 500 that the West had been lost, but again this didn't really convince anybody. Justinian's imperial project was based around three things: law, building, and religion. It was his belief that a Christian emperor had specific obligations to the empire, which was, in the language of imperial Christian propaganda, all part of God's divine plan. So therefore, the Roman Empire could not have fallen in 476. God would not have allowed that. But he did think that there was an interruption caused by the barbarians. In 527, when Justinian took power as a divine emperor, as he saw it, a Roman count, Marcellinus, wrote the following. Odoacer, king of the Goths, took control of Rome. Odoacer slew Orestes right there. Odoacer condemned Augustulus, the son of Orestes, with the penalty of exile in Lucullanum, a fortress in the Campania. The Western Empire of the Roman people, which the first Emperor Octavian Augustus had begun to rule in the 709th year from the foundation of the city, perished with this Augustulus. This was a novel argument which took notions about an idealized past which had been swirling around the intellectual and political scene in Constantinople since about 510, and basically put it on steroids. When Justinian looked west, this now was what he saw. Marcellinus eventually became Justinian's secretary, and he gave his emperor a useful tool, because he stated that Odoacer was a Goth. But he was not a Goth. He was Herulian, maybe, or Scyrian, we don't actually know. There's one argument that he was maybe a Thuringian, but he definitely was not a Goth. But Theodoric was, and in Marcellinus we begin to see outlines of the idea that the Goths had taken down Rome. That was not the political or cultural reality, though, but it didn't matter, because in this new political context, if the reality of the world did not reflect the ideals, then the reality of the world would be changed to reflect those ideals. This, right here, is why we learn in textbooks about Rome falling in 476. It is literally Roman propaganda about Rome itself.
Wow. I'm sorry, I needed to absorb all that. I try not to be too silent, but like, this is all new to me, and I'm like trying to absorb it all in my brain. So Justinian, man. Because it's always been framed as Justinian. Every YouTube video we've watched about Justinian's time, it's about retaking the West, reconquering, and it's interesting he put this video in particular says it wasn't that, it was more of a renewal. So I think that's already so different. That alone puts such a different spin on it. And just how, like, yeah, at the time you're living, I guess, no, the West is still here, like, even though we, at least when we learn about history, it's like, the fall of the West is like this finalized thing, but at the time, it's not. There's still an idea of it, even though, you know, I'm not putting it into words correctly, but it is such a unique situation, you know, that everyone's going through here.
When a friendly Vandal king was deposed and a friendly Gothic queen was killed, the justifications for arguing that these ideas that the barbarians had destroyed some idealized notion of the Roman state and that their non-orthodox brands of Christianity were corrupting what was supposed to be a divine state were now there. For 20 years or so, Roman armies invaded North Africa and Italy in an attempt to restore the Roman Empire to its former state, and the Romans backed one faction in a political crisis in Visigothic Spain. With victories on the battlefield, Justinian's renovatio would now be more than just an idea in his imagination. That renewal extended also to laws and to religion and to building, because in Justinian's mind, it mattered what one did and what one believed. It mattered a great deal to be orthodox. His law code, the Corpus Juris Civilis, attempted to study Roman law in depth and remove inconsistencies and iron out legal precedents and solve long-standing problems. In this way, Justinian removed every inconsistency from what he saw as laws which were backed by the power of heaven. His laws were designed to create a more uniform Roman Empire to better carry out God's divine plan for the Roman state on earth, and now that it was restored, God's plan could be carried out. Those who were still pagan lost their civil service jobs in 529, and Justinian launched persecutions of pagans and heretical Christians in the empire, and some were even exiled, or worse, killed. In matters of construction, Justinian spent untold sums on everything from fortifications to aqueducts to roadways to stadiums, but dominating it all was the great temple of the Hagia Sophia, designed to be grander than the first temple of the Jews described in the Old Testament. Indeed, one source records Justinian as he stepped through the finished doorway of the temple, saying, "Solomon, I have outdone thee."
Yeah. famous Justinian quote there.
The price for his imperial project, however, were the lives of hundreds of thousands, a battered economy, and the plague of Justinian, now confirmed in 2013 to indeed be the bubonic
Yeah, that's
plague.
so interesting. Justinian, his theological viewing of the Roman Empire and what it led him to do is what kind of leads this notion of Rome falling and like recontextualizes how, I guess, the situation, you know, and he seized upon those deaths to move forward. Wow, that adds a completely new layer to Justinian, and to his motives, you know, and to what's going on in his head, and wow. Wow, that's enlightening. These videos are enlightening.
Plague, and the bizarre weather of 535 and 536, during which the sun was covered by a dust veil and the temperature cooled by at least 2 degrees, left an empire which was militarily conquered, but otherwise devastated. It produced an intellectual shift as well, as there were now 2 distinct Roman empires. The First Empire, which had dispatched Theodoric to Italy in the first place and with which many of the successor kingdoms understood themselves to be broadly operating, was gone. Justinian's wars left their mark in a piece of writing, the Varii of Cassiodorus, a Roman living in Theodoric's kingdom, who had to grapple with a disturbing idea. If the Goths and the Romans were living in the Roman Empire, as people in Ostrogothic Italy thought they were and as people living in Constantinople prior to 527 thought they were, then why were the Romans coming to conquer them? It made no sense to people at the time.
Oh.
Justinian's imperial project forced people all over the empire to shift their thinking. Just who and what was Roman and what was not. Sure, many Goths were ethnically Gothic, but they had lived within the borders of Rome for multiple generations, and we have tombstones of Frankish soldiers which state that those buried beneath them were Franks by birth, but Romans in life and Romans in death. Besides, the Emperor Justinian himself was from some backwater little village in the mountains of what is today Macedonia.
Yeah, and that's the thing about the Romans. It's like, it kind of... It went above ethnicity, you know, because the Romans originated on Italy, but it became this identity that you could be from, like, born in Britain or born in, like, Greece, but you were Roman, you know, because it was all under the Roman banner. And so with Theodoric's, you know, appearance of ruling on behalf of Rome, it creates this, we're still here, but now with Justinian's whole theological process and thoughts and his, you know, renewal, as it were, of the Roman Empire, makes you think, wait a minute, but like, we take the name of Rome, but apparently through this emperor we're not Roman, because why would he try to conquer like, yeah, that's gonna be oddly confusing, right? And then it's like, we're not Rome? Like, what is Rome, you know? Rome is more than just a city. It's more than even, I think, an ethnic identity. It became this, anyone in those borders is Roman, and so, like, yeah, my brain's starting to hurt now. But you get what I'm saying, right? It's more than just, like, yeah, that's a lot to grapple with. Like, imagine living here during this time, being like, wait a minute, like, trying to grapple with what the heck's going on here. Yeah, even like Justinian, born in Greece, but he's Roman because Greece was a part of Rome for a long time, you know, so... Yeah, the Roman identity is an interesting one, and those who take claim to it, you know?
To blue-blooded Roman aristocrats who could trace their ancestry back centuries, Justinian was little more than a poorly educated hick. The Roman Empire which emerged after his reign was a Roman Empire in which the Roman identity had been disrupted and broken. What mattered now wasn't necessarily some shared history, but notions of religious orthodoxy and legality proven by success in all things imperial. Of course, it also backfired on Justinian because by declaring war on a kingdom which saw itself as fundamentally a part of the Roman world, indeed as a copy of the only empire. To quote a letter sent by Theodoric to the Emperor Zeno, Justinian opened up European politics to the possibility of having a state describe itself as Roman, only to have another self-described Roman state declare that essentially, you're not Rome, I'm Rome. And it's a process which is...
And isn't that I've joked about this a lot. Like when Rome was gone, everyone was like, I'm Rome. No, I'm Rome. Even to this day, everyone's like, who's the heir of Rome? You have, the Russians up there. We're Romans, and we're Rome. When Constantinople fell, the Ottomans were like, no, we're Rome. It's like, everybody's Rome. I'm Rome, she's Rome, he's Rome, they're Rome. We're all Roman. Maybe that's the truth, guys. Maybe we are all Roman around the world, I might be like, a guy born in a completely different continent than the Roman Empire, America, and my blood might be from Central American Nicaraguenses and Salvadorians. But I'm still Rome. I'm joking now, but yeah, you can see now. That's kind of interesting because I've joked a lot because we've seen everyone claim to be Rome. Everyone is debating who's the true successor of Rome. And it's interesting to see that Justinian and what he did, changing the way the Romans viewed, at least in the West, how they viewed themselves by implementing this new orthodox theological / imperial identity on top of just history, really made everyone see like, okay, who is Rome now? And it's a thing that people still talk about and like think about to this day. Who's Rome? Who's the next Rome? Who's the true heir of Rome? Like, yeah, like so much. And I didn't think we could even trace this to Justinian and his acts, but apparently, at least according to this video, that has a part to play in all this. So wow.
Never really stopped. Some time ago, I released a video examining Byzantine historiography and why professionals use the term and if it is indeed useful. The comments were full of people decrying its use. If you want to know why that's still a debate, look no further than the reign of Justinian. After his decades-long war and the devastation of plague, surveying the wreckage, especially in Italy where people are difficult to come by archaeologically after about 530, one perhaps wonders if Justinian did indeed realize that his secretary Marcellinus was correct after all. Rome did fall, but he got the date wrong.
Well, that I'm gonna have to rewatch that video like 3 different times to fully absorb it. Like, this is the kind of video I need to keep looking at, because I know there's a lot there that even I'm still trying to grapple with. So yeah, that was great. I'm gonna have to rewatch this a few times, guys. But this was this video got me thinking in a way many others haven't about so much. And it kind of changes the way I view Justinian and everything after. Well, I'll end the video here, but this was great, guys. And yeah, make sure to follow the Historian's Craft, because I think that's just a great video, great presentation, and I'll see you guys tomorrow when we do something else. Bye, everyone.